If you have an HVAC company, chances are, or a plumbing company, or electrical company, or landscaping company, or really like any home services company right now, chances are you're getting emails daily or weekly from people that are looking to buy your business or connect you with buyers. And the truth is that there are a lot of people that are wanting to buy these businesses. So if you are a seller and you are trying to sell your business, I can tell you my story when I sold my company and how I sold my company at a point in time when it actually wasn't doing well financially, and how buyers will actually value your company based on size and what goes into that valuation. But basically, in a nutshell, the bigger the company, the more valuable or the higher the multiple that they will pay. And so to give you an example of that, let's say you had a $1 million company that had very high margins. So maybe you had a 40% net margin or 40% EBITDA. And so you were taking home 400 grand a year. Now, you might right now, because of how things are being valued, you might get a 1 or 2 or 2.5 multiple on that money because you were at a smaller revenue number, being $1 million in revenue. And depending on how much of that revenue you were responsible for as the owner is going to determine, whether or not that multiple is on the higher side or on the lower side. Because if that number was, if you were responsible for all of the sales and you did a lot of the installs or you ran the install crews, then what's happening is people are looking at that business and that are trying to buy it, and they're thinking, okay, I'm going to discount it from that because when the owner sells it to me, he's leaving, and so that revenue is going to go away or potentially go down, or I'm going to have to replace that person with a manager, which costs money, and so that's going to cut into the profits. And so they're looking at things a little bit differently than when they're looking to buy a business that's, let's say, doing 5 million in revenue or 10 million in revenue or more than that. And the reason is when you get to a 5 million or a $10 million in revenue business, at $5 million in revenue, you probably have around 25 employees, and you probably are clearing, maybe a lower margin. You're probably around 20%, which would mean you're taking home $1 million. But on that $1 million, they might value it at a 5x multiple. And it really depends on how bad they want to be in that market. So there's a lot of variables. But the reason you would get a much higher multiple on that business is because for that business to run efficiently, there's going to be managers, there's going to be a sales team, there's going to be install crews, there might even be an install manager at that side. You probably have a general manager or maybe an operations coordinator that is helping managing things. And so the owner is probably not as involved in the operations. Now, if you're an owner and you're doing around 5 million in revenue, and you're doing everything at the company where you're responsible for 4 million in sales, doing those sales, the more valuable your company becomes. The more you can get away from doing installs, the more valuable your company becomes. The more you can get away from doing anything in the company, the more that your business will be viewed by potential buyers as an asset that runs itself, then they will view it as, a company that is dependent on one person, being you, the owner. And I knew this from relatively early on because when I first started, when I entered the HVAC space, originally my plan when I started my own company was to scale it to a larger size and then do an ESOP or something like that. And part of that thought process for me for doing an employee stock ownership plan where your employees become owners, it sounded idealistic to me where I could kind of give things back to my employees. And the more I looked into it down the road, it became less feasible in the sense that I talked to people who had actually done it, or I talked to people in the space. And there was mixed reviews on the benefits of actually doing it and how it actually pans out when you do an ESOP. And for it to make a lot of sense or to get a big multiple on it, you really want to have a much bigger company. It just depends. It's one of those things where I'm not going to speak to it that much because I didn't do it, but that was just the feedback I was hearing. And so I started learning how to sell a business, and when you sell a business, how it's going to be valued, rather, meaning what people are going to look at and how different types of revenue are going to be valued. And for example, particularly in the HVAC space, one thing that I learned was that one of the things that companies, when I was getting ready to sell, I sold very much quicker than I was anticipating. And so when I say I was getting ready to sell, I mean literally within a week of getting ready to sell, I had an offer on the business, or maybe a couple weeks within wanting to sell. And so it happened very quickly for me. But the things that they're looking for that people that are buying your business are going to like more of is repeating revenue. So recurring revenue streams, meaning like if you have a maintenance agreement. So if you're an HVAC company, plumbing company, electrical company, landscape business, anything where you have a repeating revenue model where you have people on a contract to come out once a month or once a quarter quarter or once a year to do annual maintenance or to clean the lawn or to clean the pool. This is why pool routes are very valuable. That type of revenue, any type of recurring revenue on a membership subscription, gets valued at a much higher number than, let's say, a one-off installation that you sell for $10,000 or $20,000 or $100,000, whatever it is, doesn't matter. They don't value that revenue to the same extent that they value that recurring revenue, because when they look at that recurring revenue, they view that as a much stickier customer. That's a customer that has brand loyalty to your specific brand. And so when they see those things, they're going to value your company at a much higher level. And the truth is, I don't want to say lucky to sell, but I was lucky to sell for the price I did at the time, because it was definitely more than the company was worth on paper, but it was just what I needed to be able to walk from the company. But the truth is that larger firms or like private equity groups will always prefer kind of larger businesses typically, meaning they're going to like businesses that are doing 3 million, 5 million or more in revenue. Some businesses, they only look at businesses doing, over 10. But really, they're going to like those larger businesses because in that larger acquisition, there's actually less risk. And the reason there's less risk is kind of some of the things I've talked about earlier, where the owner's not involved. There's more systems in place. There's more things going on to make it an actual viable business that's running without you, so that when you disappear, the phone's still going to keep ringing. Customers are getting served by employees. There's plenty of employees doing things. So it's not just about you and what you do and what you bring to the table. And so that provides less risk for them and is therefore a more valuable asset. Surprisingly, a lot of private, if you're looking to sell your business, meaning you're under 5 million in revenue, under 3 million in revenue, or you're around 1 million in revenue, maybe you're a one-man show or a two-man show, and you don't have a lot of systems in place, you can still sell your business. And the truth is those deals are oftentimes a lot easier to get done, especially for private buyers. Now, when I say private buyers, most of these are, private buyers. They're not from public companies, unless you're a really big acquisition for the most part. But private buyers, we're talking about people that are just looking to break into the space, or maybe they're looking for a strategic acquisition. Maybe they have an HVAC company and they're trying to buy a small plumbing company, or maybe they have a pool company and they're looking to acquire a similar home service business to augment something that they're already providing. Those types of acquisitions can happen much quicker and much easier. You're dealing with a small mom and pop buyer, so it's a little bit different in terms of how those deals get done, because there's oftentimes less due diligence, where a private equity group can put you on ice, meaning that they tie you up in a contract with a letter of intent for months, only to, fall out of contract after months and months and months of due diligence. And it can be kind of a nerve-wracking experience, because you're having to run your company at the same time that you're selling it, and you don't know what's going on. And so that's why anytime you're going through that process, you definitely want to be very secretive and not tell anyone about it in your company. Not even though you might be tempted to. I know I felt tempted to, and I wanted to open up to people, but the risk is that as soon as you open your mouth about that, if people know that you're selling your company, they'll be like, oh, well, if Howard's selling, I'm going to head for the hills, why am I going to stick around? And then the value of your company goes way down, and then you're in an even worse financial position if you are really needing to sell for some other reasons, and you don't want to put yourself in that position. And so even though it might be tempting, the best thing you can do is just keep it to yourself when you're trying to sell. And this is why anyone who's a potential buyer will always be willing to sign a very strict confidentiality agreement, because they know how important that is to keep things on the up and up, and to keep things hush hush while you're in the negotiations phase, because nothing is over until the deal is done, and it can literally fall apart at the very last minute. And on that note, that brings me kind of to my deal, and I'll tell you exactly how my business got sold, how that went down. But when I sold my company, and I'll tell you exactly what I sold for, but I sold for 1.7 million. And the reason that was the number I sold for was because I was over $1 million in debt at the time. And the reason I sold, it was kind of an emotional journey, and I'll kind of take you through that. But I wanted out of my company because I was very unhappy, and I had been unhappy and struggling with it for a while, off and on for years. And there had been periods where I'd be happy or believe in the vision, and then, within a day or a week, or inevitably I'd hit some roadblocks again where I'd be unhappy, and it just wasn't my calling, and it wasn't what I wanted to do. And then when I had a blessing, my daughter was born and came into my life. Within 2 days of that occurrence, when I was in the hospital, I just made my decision. I was ready to sell, and I had absolute clarity that that's what the right move for me was. But the truth is it's actually a very emotional journey. Like when I was going through the emotions of selling my business, some of the things I did in terms of asking myself questions was like, I asked myself, okay, if I sell the company tomorrow, how am I actually going to, how do I feel about that? And I was starting to realize that when I thought about selling my company, my association of pain would go down, my anxiety would go down, my sense of relief would go up. And so it started to become very clear that I associated the business with pain and I associated exiting the business with pleasure. And I had a lot of clarity on that wasn't going to change, even if the circumstances of the business changed. Because the first time I had clarity on that note and was wondering whether or not I was even in the right business was in 2021, when I had my best year in terms of earnings and revenue at the time, and where we did 2.7 million in revenue and we cleared 500 grand. That was the largest revenue numbers we had thrown up, and I was still unhappy. I was still frustrated. I was still stressed out, and I wasn't enjoying it, and I didn't want to be running it. I was able to reinvigorate some levels of passion, but ultimately came back to the amount of stress I had from running that company was just, I was so miserable. There was no amount of money that was going to make it worth it, because it was just not what I enjoyed doing anymore. And it wasn't my calling. And what was really becoming sad for me was that there was hundreds of other things that I wanted to do. And if you're an entrepreneur, you probably relate to that statement a lot, where there was like all these other things I wanted to do, but it was like the business kept getting in the way of me doing what I wanted to do with my life. And so I was willing to, sell the business for what I needed to be able to walk with and get out from under it and be able to satisfy my tax liability, pay off my debts, and be done with it and move on to the next project. And even though I didn't sail off into the sunset with my millions and, go buy a yacht and a jet, it was still something where I had a lot of clarity that I was ready to sell and I wanted out. And on the day that the business sale closed, I was so happy, or like the sense of relief was so much, I could almost cry. I felt so much relief, and like the pressure was just dropped substantially. And I still had a lot of transition work, because I was helping with the transition to make sure everything went smoothly for the new owners. And that was, still a stressful process for definitely a few months, like 3 to 4 months of getting things, moved over. And there was still some, back and forth and staying on top of things. But it was a wonderful move at the end of the day. And I'm glad that I did that. So if you're in a position where you're thinking about selling your business, or something I shared has resonated with you and you're wanting, whether it's help on, scaling or operations, I don't have anything to sell. I do work with business brokers. So if you're wanting a referral to a business broker, I can refer you to a business broker or connect you with a company that might be interested in acquiring your company if that's something you're serious about doing. But if you're looking to operationalize your business, I can also refer you to some resources that I receive no benefit from, in terms of like, I don't receive monetary compensation for sending you to these consultants or people that I know that can help you operationalize your business. Or companies like Alex Hormozi, acquisition.com, or Grant Cardone's 10X program, or Tony Robbins' Business Mastery program. Those were all really helpful along the way at various inflection points when I was growing my business. And they were indisposable in terms of helping me really start to understand what it would take to operationalize a business, even though I didn't take it all the way to the original vision that I had set out for it when I started the company, where I thought I was going to have a 9-figure business. I realized that's not what I wanted in this space. And although I am pursuing other things that I do love and enjoy, now I'm free to do that because I don't have that company anymore. So I hope you found this content helpful and heartfelt. And if you did, hit the like button for the algorithm and consider subscribing to the channel. And if you haven't done so already, check out this next video.